So thanks again, Ginger. Thanks for having me down here. I'm really excited to follow Matt's presentation. I really liked it, and I liked that the assessment tool he had. I wish I had that when I was farming full-time, because I swore there were some marketing channels I was doing that I thought was not worth my time, but I had no way of showing that or proving that to myself. And I'm going to echo some of the stuff Matt said, which I guess is good, so we must be right, because they had no idea what each other was going to present. And I was like, oh, when I saw he was going to do that, I got really nervous. I said, wow, if we contradict, I'm in big trouble. So anyway, what I'm going to cover here in our next hour together is I'm going to talk a little bit about marketing and some of the things that Matt was talking about, but I'm going to address it from the consumer's point of view a little bit. And then we're going to get into the value. We're going to talk about yields from the carcass weight to that fine finished wrapped piece. And then talk about the formula I have in here that is going to talk about how you can use this formula to come up with what your break-even point is for each cut of meat. And I have to tell up front that I didn't invent this formula. I actually got it from a butcher who was giving it to producers so they could figure it out. And then I had ran this formula through our folks at Penn State, and they thought it was a great idea. And then finally, if we have enough time, I have some things on poultry as well, because I do a lot of work with poultry producers. And I'm thinking a lot of them are running into profitability troubles, especially like as Ginger was talking about, you know, the increase in feed prices. I know mine is double from what it was 3 or 4 years ago. And how to make that profitable. So in marketing, there's a basic thing we call the 4 Ps. Product, place, price, and promotion. So, you know, what is the product that we're going to sell? Oh, and before I go any further, I have slides in here that aren't in there because of the cancellation last month. I was even fine-tuning this yesterday, but of course was not able to make new handouts. So if there's information on here that you want, I can happily email you a PDF of the updated presentation. Just send me an email. So product, you know, what product is it that we're going to offer to the consumer? Where are we going to offer that, being the place? What price point? And how are we going to let them know that we have it? And if I was to add, I was thinking about, you could add a 5th P in here, and that is people. Who are the people we're going to offer to, as Matt was talking about in his presentation? You know, are we trying to sell to everybody, or is there a select group of people that we want to try to target? And that's all going to depend on what the product is, where we're going to offer it, and what price point we're going to come in. So a lot of this is also going to depend on what the customer's perception of us is, what they expect from us. How do you market yourself? How do you tell your story? And especially if you're at a farmer's market, it's a real challenge. You know, the produce people have the philosophy, you know, it's pile it high and watch it fly. Well, we can't do that. We can't be putting cuts of meat out on the table and chickens and stacking chickens up this high, waiting for people to come pick them up. We have a challenge of letting them know what we have. So, you know, what is our signage? Carries through to our logos. We should have a logo, and that logo should be consistent on all our, you know, whether it's on our labels, on our farm sign, the materials we're using at the farmer's market, even the kind of lettering you choose. You see, this might be tough to see back there, but he's using basically, he or she is using the same font for everything. It's kind of creating an identity. And one could argue that this is really what the customer wants to see. I've seen this is Hardwick Beef's website, or at least it was. It might be different now because I've had this for a couple of years. But what don't you see on there? What's that? A live cow. How much does your customer really care what that animal looks like? Because you could make the argument that in their mind, they're buying grass-fed beef, and they're having that conversation to you. This is what they're imagining your farm looks like, and this is what they want to enjoy, that plate of food, when they get home. You know, that's what might be running through their mind as they're buying that product too. So you can think about that in your materials. I was down at West Virginia Small Farm Conference doing a presentation, and they had a really cool they called it Midwinter Blues Market. And these farmers came into the hotel, and they set up a farmer's market. They must have had like 50 different farms there. Well, there was one young guy who was just getting into marketing his lamb. So he was actually taking orders. But what he had there was all photographs of lambs, you know. And so these people from Morgantown were actually knew this. They do this every year, so they were chomping at the bit to get into the conference to go shop at the farmer's market. I was wondering how many of them were actually going to look at the baby lamb and place an order for lamb chops. It's not necessarily what they wanted. They might be foodies, but they may not want to connect that with your products. And the one story I always tell, but sometimes it's a learning experience, right? I'm lucky enough that I think the last furrier on the East Coast is a mile from my USDA processor. So they would actually ship the skins. The only question they ask, you want them washable or dry clean? And I would tell them what I'd want. They'd ship them off when they slaughter the animal. And the furrier would call me in however many weeks and say, hey, pick up your lambskins. So I was able to sell them at the market. Well, we'd stack them up here, and you had to have a stack. You can't have 2 lambskins because nobody would buy them. But if you got 6 or whatever, you know, you could stack them up, you could sell them. And a mother, regular customer of mine, came up with her son, and he had to be 4 or 5 years old at the most. And of course, they all want to touch the skins, and they're petting the skins, and you know, it feels so soft. And she's trying to order some lamb chops from me and everything, and he looks at her, and he looks at the skins, and he says, "They kill their lambs?" About that volume. Now she's like mortified and she's embarrassed, and I just about bust out laughing because he wasn't sure what he made of this. It wasn't like, he wasn't sure he objected, but he was making the connection. To me, it was a learning experience, right? But the mother was embarrassed. So think about the kind of image that you really want to project about your farm. Or, you know, one could argue that this is really what we're selling. So there's a group, an organization called the Hartman Group, and they're a big organization. They do studies and focus groups for large food businesses and companies all over the country. And they did a study on the idea of the world of sustainability. You know, sustainability is a vague word. It annoys us sometimes because we could have even in sustainable agriculture, you could talk all day about what that means to each one of us and might mean something different to everybody. But he was talking about what it meant to the consumers who think about this. You know, what sustainability is, what it means to them. And they basically broke it up into 4 groups. What they called a core group, inner mid-level, outer mid-level, and a periphery. And so you can think about, you know, core level, they said 13% of these folks who are considered about sustainable communities, sustainable lifestyles, they're real hardcore. And they would be more like the foodie people that Matt was talking about. And 13% didn't bother me because you can hear that there's always that term, it's either 20-80 or 90-10 rule, that 10% of your customers will drive 90% of your business. That might be this group here. And this is what was important to them. And you can see this echoes, the language echoes a lot of what like Matt was talking about. So what are they looking for if they were buying local food? You know, it's transparency. These are the folks that are going to buy from your, you know, maybe on the farm sales or at least at the farmer's market where they can have a conversation with the person that raised the food. Local, you know, authenticity, greater good. You know, it's all part, you know, grass-fed beef is going to be better for the environment, and the fact that you're 10 miles down the road from me, I can buy, you know, it's all good to them. Knowledge, they have a certain amount of knowledge, but they also like to gain knowledge. They like to know what you know. They may ask you questions, such as, and for me, what I came to learn out was spending 10 years selling at a farmer's market, and I was also the market manager, was the folks that came up and asked me, you know, they'd be looking at my information or reading whatever, you know, stuff I had out right in front of our tent there, and they'd say, "Are you organic?" I came to learn that that was a way. They wanted to ask a question. They basically want to say, how do you raise your animals? But they don't want to insult you. They're afraid of asking a stupid question. So that's the question they know to ask. So for me, I took it as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to have a conversation. They want to have a conversation about what I do. Because if you want to make some farmer crazy about that question, just ask a produce grower, tree fruit grower, are you organic? And watch the steam come out of their ears. Because it's just so hard to be an organic tree fruit farmer, even if they want to be. Experience, so in my mind, expert opinion, experience, these are the folks that are maybe going to come out in the fall to do the hay rides, pick your own pumpkins, those kinds of things. They kind of want the on-farm experience. Of course, everybody wants a personal benefit. But then as we move out to the periphery, these are the values that are important to these folks, right? Price, convenience, compatibility. To me, what business uses that language in the food industry? Walmart, something like that. It is about your grocery stores, large grocery stores. It's about price. It's about convenience. The compatibility is, is this the same that I had last week? Is this going to be the same thing I had last week? So what's my takeaway from this kind of information is, all right, so if I'm trying to market my grass-fed beef, and I see this a lot of times, folks that are new to it, the first thing they don't know where to advertise or market, so they put an ad in classifieds or the weekly paper that comes free in the mailbox that has people selling stuff or what have you, and I'll see it in there all the time because my wife loves that paper, and she's looking, oh, so-and-so selling grass-fed beef. And I find out, well, how many calls did you get? Well, not many, but it reaches 50,000 households. Well, what's the percentage of those people in the household, and those households that are shopping with those values? Because that's probably not where they're getting their information, is from the classifieds. They're probably getting their information maybe from the internet. Remember, they want knowledge, they want experience, they want authenticity. So then you might be thinking about where you're going to try to market what you have. And then maybe it is more, if this is the group you want to reach, where are they getting their information? So it might be like Local Harvest. In Pennsylvania, we have a lot of Buy Fresh, Buy Local chapters that all have farm listings that allow farmers to list their products for free, what they have to offer. And maybe it is farmers markets, CSAs. But there are some barriers, right, to entering the direct marketing. And thanks to Ginger, I got a lot of this information to get me to think about. What are some of the barriers? Well, some of consumers' lack of trust from an unknown source. They don't know you yet. We don't have a relationship yet. I mean, all of us have products that we buy all the time because we like it. We trust that brand name. And if another brand name comes on the market, we might not be necessarily likely to try that if we're not familiar with it. If they want grass-fed meats, there's certain expectations that they're going to have about grass-fed meats, just maybe because they read Michael Pollan's book. Maybe they haven't even tried grass-fed meat yet, but they have certain expectations. They expect that it'll cost more because they've heard that. But with that, they're going to expect more. So they are going to expect a certain amount of consistency of the product and a certain amount of eating quality every time they buy something from you. So can we provide a consistently good eating experience for our customers? There's concerns about the taste of grass-fed beef. I've heard it's gamey. I've heard it can be tough. How are we going to what are we going to use to get over those things? And how convenient is it for me to get this? Can I get this every week from your farm? Are you going to be at the farmer's market every week? They're going to have certain expectations about how often they can buy this stuff. And I'll give you an example. In our place, when we started, my goal was the poultry. I really like raising sheep. And that's really what I wanted to do. So poultry was a way to bring people in that I could eventually sell them lamb, which worked really well because unless they're vegetarian or vegan, just about everybody likes chicken. Except for some old farmers who've raised chickens before and they never want to eat a chicken again. So my goal was, and we have a crappy quarter-mile farm lane. There's a couple other farms on our lane. We're at the very end, and it is not your bucolic Pennsylvania Dutch-looking farm when you get to the end of that lane that you might be expecting to see. But what they did get is I knew every week they could get fresh chickens, they could get eggs, and then the other products we would have maybe on a bi-weekly basis. But they knew that if they came down the lane that we were going to have something to sell them, wasn't going to make that trip all the way out there and say, sorry, I'm not going to have it till next week. But that's a lot of work. That was a lot of work on our part to meet that. So, and there's resistance to buying in large volumes, which I think Matt alluded to about, how do we entice our customers to buy in larger volumes so we can have that higher profitability of doing maybe more of a freezer trade type business. There's hidden costs involved that we don't necessarily think about as producers. One is just the time factor. If we're spending 16 hours a day, running from sunup to sundown on our farm just to get things done, nobody's necessarily really told you that if you're going to go into direct market, or maybe they have, but I haven't found it that often, that it takes about at least 30% of your time. You've got to figure out somewhere in that 16 hours of the day that you have to chop 30% of that might be added to your marketing. Because I think, like Matt said, I always viewed it the same way. Marketing started as soon as I made the decision that I'm going to harvest that animal. Because you have to figure in your time and decisions you make from that point on. So that's, well, yeah, being a producer and marketer, add labor, transportation, time, and storage costs. We've got food safety protocols we got to figure about. And that's what I like with working with the farmers market folks up there, and everybody's worried about the Food Safety Modernization Act. I've got produce people coming to me all the time. What are we going to have to do? I said, well, welcome to our world from a livestock producer, right? We have our labels we have to, we have USDA and we have state protocols that we have to follow. If there's genetics involved, if we're using rarer breeds, something that's going to be a little more expensive, that's going to add to our costs. So let's look at how we're going to take all, so given that all in consideration, we got that all figured out. Now how are we going to price this stuff out? And this, Dr. John Comerford from Penn State, this was from an article he had where he was looking at a survey that was done just, 2009 of 26 grass-fed producers in the Mid-Atlantic region. So that's, right in this area. And indicated over 76% of producers sold their beef both as carcass, sides, and quarters, and as individual cuts. So the average price of the carcass at this time, side, a quarter, sides and quarters was $2.25 a pound, and for individual cuts was $4.96 a pound. So given that, but a lot has changed in the last several months, right? Commodity beef has exceeded $1.85 a pound. So if you are dropping them on a truck, and that's the extent of your marketing, and carcass values to consumers have risen slightly as well. So we got to figure this out to figure out what's the best marketing avenue that we want to take. Well, that's going to all based down on your cost of production, which we're not going to get into today because there's plenty of workshops to talk about cost of production, but if we know our cost of production, depending on the breed, depending on how the animal's raised, if it's grain-fed or grass-fed, what kind of animal is it, beef, pork, or lamb, because the yields are going to be different for each. What's going to be our best marketing avenue and figuring out our price point and profitability that's going to give us the best. So let's look at the different yields for the three, and this starting off with pork. And this I run into all the time because I run into producers and they're so happy. He says, I'm getting a 70% yield. At what level are you getting a 70% yield? Well, I got 70%. Is it from your live weight to carcass weight? Is it from your carcass weight then to your cuts? Because if you're selling, that's pretty much what matters in the end, right? So follow along if you will. And like I said, there's pages that follow in this that I apologize aren't in there. But so from your live, you basically can get 70% yield from the live weight to the carcass weight. So, if you got a live weight of 245 pounds, say the actual dress percentage of this pig was 176 pounds, okay? So now we're going to take that pig, which is fine if that's how we're marketing it and we're just at selling halves, let's say. But now maybe we're going to sell individual cuts at our farm and farmers market or through a CSA. Well, we're going to have further loss, right? So for bone-in pork, expect no more than 75 to 80% of the carcass weight back as meat. For boneless, it's going to be a little less, right? Because you're taking the weight out of the bones if you're getting boneless cuts. So in this example, we had 176-pound carcass weight. We got boneless pork back, so we've actually had 123 pounds of saleable meat. Okay? And what we're going to get into at the end of these three examples is then how we're going to figure out what that price should be per average cut of meat. So we're determining the carcass weight for cattle is about 60 to 62% from live weight to carcass weight. So as Ginger was saying before we started, that how important it is to know the live weight of that animal so we know where our starting point is. I was fortunate enough that I could scales right at my processor, so when I was dropping those lambs off, I could run them up on scales, so I knew, because I didn't have scales at my farm, so I could always at least come away with my live weight when I left those animals there. Especially doing lambs, right? A lot of processors I use, they don't like doing lambs. Trying to find a processor that likes doing lambs, because they make more money on this. So going from live weight 1312, dress percentage 60% on this carcass, so we got 787 carcass weight. And so for bone-in beef, expect no more than 65 to 70% of the carcass weight back as meat. Boneless, 55 to 60%. So in this scenario, we have boneless beef back, so we got 472 pounds. You with me so far? So we've got this two-step process, from live weight to carcass weight, from carcass weight to cuts. And lamb, the average dressing percentage is about 50%. So we take 127-pound lamb, and this one was just 52% of the live weight, and so we got 66 pounds of carcass weight. And then from most here, so most lamb is all bone in. There isn't really a boneless lamb done, unless it's shoulder roast or something you could debone. And you get about 50 pounds of meat back, because you're going to get 70-75% carcass weight if everything's boned in on the lamb. Now, of course, this varies depending on different breeds and such. So, but at least it gives you I think it gives you a basis to start from. Some kind of basic numbers you can make some estimates out of, especially if you're able to weigh your animals on your farm in their live weight. You might be able to make some educated, assumptions from there. So for our example that we're going to use here, let's say our steer that we're going to slaughter is grass-fed Angus steer. Hanging carcass weight is 58% of the live weight. Because sometimes the grass-fed, for whatever reason, according to Dr. Comerford, can not dress out quite as high. Finding your break-even point. Okay. Now see if you can bear with me in this, and if not, I'm happy to repeat anything because I think it can get a little confusing. So we know the live weight of our animal. So, and I figured out that in our live weight of the animal, I know I figured out all my cost of production to bring that animal up to the point where I want to have it slaughtered. I've got $1.35 per pound of live weight vested in that animal. For my time, feeding costs, whatever all my costs are just up to. That's my break-even point. If I sell that animal live, I need at least that per pound to cover all my costs. So if I take that $1.35 and divide it by 58%, it gives me $2.33 per pound. That's going to be my hanging weight cost, because remember, 58% is our yield from live weight to carcass weight. So now I want to know, well, given that loss, what do I need per pound now to break even? Remember, we're not talking about the profit yet. We're just talking about breaking even. Okay, so now I'm going to take that carcass weight and I'm going to make it into cuts that I want to be able to sell at my farmers markets and at my farm. So I got to figure in, one, what my processing fee is. So all right, so I take that $2.33 and my processor is charging me 65 cents per pound processing fee for cut and wrap. So now my break-even point is $2.98 per pound. So just to get that into cuts. But what is my loss when I do that? Well, my loss is going to be 65% of my hanging weight. So I divide the 298, take 298 divided by 65%, and now my break-even point is $4.58 per pound for each one of those cuts I get back. You with me? It's a lot of steps. Yes? How many what? I wasn't figuring any of that at all. I was just figuring out, roughly guess, just for this exercise, how much per pound it was costing me, but that would be up to you. Obviously, that is going to change, you know, and if it's, I mean, because I know a lot of folks are going to say, you know, well, if it's forage, well, I'm cutting my own forage. I'm not buying forage yet, I'm cutting it all in my place. Well, that's got a value if you were going to sell that instead of feed it, so what's the value of that? Yes, sir.
Also, you ain't figured nothing in there for travel expenses to the processor or anything either, are you?
I am not at this point.
Because see, you take like from me, for instance, I've got 2 hours one way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 2 hours going, 2 hours coming, and then when I go pick it up, that's another 2 hours going down and 2 hours coming back.
Right. So you may, right. You want to factor that in. But just to have a formula, so then you would add that to this, right? You're going to factor that into your total cost of production because I'm not sure where else to put it. You know what I mean? Just so I can work this formula. I mean, arguably, like Matt said, you know, the marketing cost starts when I make the decision to harvest that animal. So that travel will go into that, but it's got to be added in there somewhere, and that's where I would factor that in. If it's going so it changes my price per pound. Ginger. That's a really good point, Ginger. Thanks you, because to me that gets back to this, right? That's what you're saying. So if that's what Lancaster Farming is saying is the current price, you know, regardless of what my cost of production is, I have $1.35. I probably might want to start out with the $1.85. Right. Right, so in this model, this would have been a grass-fed steer.
You do your own hay, you feed them all winter. That's all the diesel fuel and everything, or no? I'm just wondering.
Well, I didn't do all that to come up with this figure. At the time I came up with this figure, I was kind of going by what the market price was then. So this is a couple years old. So I wasn't figuring in all that stuff. But I'm just assuming you know your costs. Yes? Okay, so that's your yield from going from the carcass weight to the cuts. Yes.
So if you were selling quarters half freezer beef that Matt was talking about, number 3 would be your price.
Right. That would be your break-even point. So yeah, the question was, if you're selling quarters and halves, you're not selling cuts. then your calculations could stop here. Well, no, because they're not, oh yeah, yes, I would, because you're still getting the 65 cents to cut and wrap for them to break it down for your customer, yes. So that your break-even price is here, but if we're having individual cuts that we're going to sell, so now this is our break-even price. Yes? That was my immediate takeaway when I started doing this is, all right, I'm not making any money selling ground beef at that price, because that's still a common price for grass-fed ground beef that a lot of folks are selling, at least up my way. So now we want to figure in a profit, right? We got our break-even price across the board. So let's say we need, and here again, the 25% is just a guess. It could be that percentage of profit is your decision, what you need to make to have profit come back in your farm, because I'm also figuring that $4.58 break-even price, that's got our labor figured into it, which we all do, right? We all figure in our labor in everything we do, don't we? Okay. And but we want profitability to be able to put profit back into our business, so we'll be able to, make repairs, make investments, make improvements. So let's say, all right, I figured out I need 25% profit margin to come back into my business. So we just take that 458 divided by 75%, and now my cuts are going to be average out at $6.11. That will give me a 25% profit across the board. Okay, well, that's fine, but we've got a variety of cuts. Like I said, right, we've got ground beef, so maybe my ground beef has got to be at $6 a pound, but my steaks are going to be, I don't know, $17 Delmonico or something. And I got prices for the roast. How am I going to figure all this in to figure that out? Well, this is pretty handy too, and I just threw this in yesterday, so I had trouble doing the math on this. For some reason did that, so maybe someone can help. But still, I think it gives you a basic idea, and I've seen these on the internet, so other versions of this on the internet as well. Knowing about what percentage particular cuts are to the overall. So if Chuck is going to be 26% of the carcass weight, he says like a percentage of value, it's 30% of the value. How many steaks are you going to get out of T-bones and sirloin, New York strip, tenderloins? Now, obviously, there's new cuts coming on all the time, right? Everybody wants a steak of something. I have a friend of mine in Tennessee that told me the story about selling a half a steer to a lady, and she called her up to go over a cut sheet with her and said, "So, well, what do you want the chucks made into? Steak? What do you want this? So no, you can't. See, you're gonna have to." And she explains it to her. Okay, she moves on to the next piece. Well, what do you want the sirloin into? Top sirloin into steak. She wanted steaks out of everything, and trying to explain to her that she couldn't really do that. Well, they're finding more ways to get some steak cuts out of things. So it could change the value of these, but I think this gives you an overall tool of how to factor in, if you're taking that $6.11 average per pound, and then figuring out what the percentage is of each one of these cuts, that you can then maybe price accordingly. So if our total yield, what I should have put in, so like here, the total yield for this is 750 pounds. So I'd have to, well, that's the carcass yield. Forgive me. I'm trying to see, I don't have what the total yield of our per pounds of our grass-fed steer. You know what I mean? From the live weight to what the final thing is. If I was to add something in there, it should have been that. Because then we could take that $6.11 to whatever the final total poundage of meat is and say, all right, this is what I got to make overall to be profitable, and break that up by these percentages, it could give you an idea of where your cuts have to be priced at. Does that make sense? I know it's really confusing. You're the fused, Ginger.
So you were saying the 750 pounds is the carcass value, so you get 58% of that in meat?
No, you get 65% of that in meat. From the carcass to the cuts. Right. Well, that's true. That's true. Yeah, right. Because that's going to be your highest percentage, right?
That's kind of the question there. The problem we come across is customers will come and they'll buy the steaks right away. I can sell my fillets the first day.
Right.
And then I'll be stuck with 180 packages of ground beef and burgers.
Right.
Do people take that to restaurants, or I was just wondering what other people do that to restaurants?
Restaurants will only buy so much of it as well. You know, it varies. I mean, I know some people who can't keep it, but I also know people who constantly have too much of it in their freezer. So it might depend on your market. You know, farmer's market, you can move a lot of ground beef. Or they're having it made into patties, especially, you know, since bulk of the markets in the summertime, you can sell a lot of hamburgers. But that was the other thing I was going to say, which I saw a lot of folks start to do. Yeah. Yeah.
They want the burger because there's so many things they can do with it with the children. Now, once the children grow up and leave home, then it's a complete different ballgame.
Which is like Ginger says, so then it doesn't matter what's in the ground as long as it's profitable. You know, as long as you know that $6 a pound is what you need to make on your ground, and then like she said, everything else above that in the poundage weight is going to be, hopefully be more profitability. I have a friend of mine who he sells grass-fed beef is the bulk of what he does, and he sells at farmers markets. Okay, so he's selling, you know, everybody wants steaks and everybody wants ground beef or patties and stuff. But then he started going to, they started this thing called an artisan market. So it was all this value-added food. These folks weren't farmers, except there's a few cheesemakers there, but most of them were taking raw products and making some value-added thing. Well, that brought a whole different clientele in there. These were foodies, so they're already coming in looking for kind of gourmet items. He says he cannot keep roasts at that market. I mean, he sells more roasts than anything in there. And which just shocked me because I never heard anybody selling more roasts than anything at a market, but at that particular market, he had the right product for it.
I was getting ready to say the same thing. Depends on the area that you're in.
Right.
Some places you can sell the roast, other places people don't want to hear of it.
Yeah, this was completely different than a farmer's market. It was really geared towards the foodies.
And another thing is you need to inform your customers. We had some that all they wanted was the filet or New York strip.
Mhm.
As far as porterhouse steak, they didn't want it. But when we told them, look, you're getting the filet and the New York in a porterhouse steak, then we couldn't keep them.
Right, right. It's a matter of education, yeah.
Because really, buying the porterhouse, that was cheaper than buying the filet.
Mm-hmm.
And they were getting the filet plus the New York strip in one steak.
And it was the same thing for me. You know, I never had a rack of lamb in my life. I mean, I never had my lambs done into a rack of lamb because that's what everybody thinks of as a rack of lamb. But who buys a rack of lamb and how often? You know, if they want a rack of lamb, it's a special occasion. It's a whole big deal to do. And also, not as many people eat lamb as they're going to eat beef and pork and such. So everything I had was into chops. Even my shoulders, I would do shoulder chops because if selling at a farmer's market in July and August, chops on the grill were much more appealing to folks. You know, especially lamb chops. They're kind of small, and it's not that big of investment for them to do 4 chops. And then I couldn't keep lamb chops. But also, your customers can educate you. I had no idea what ossobuco was. I got these lamb shanks back, and I was embarrassed to sell them because there's not a lot of meat on them. But I got them back, and I was selling these things, and I had them like $5 a pound. And I had this young couple come up and they say, oh, he's got shanks. He's got shanks. You can do ossobuco. I said, ossobuco? What the hell is ossobuco? And then I come to find, and then another couple come up and do the same thing. So I look up, and here, I mean, restaurants doing ossobuco for, you know. Boy, I like doubled the price on these things, and I still couldn't keep, and I was still embarrassed to sell them because there's more bone than meat. But the customer's always right? To a certain extent. So, do we have questions on this? What's my time like? Well, it would, the same model would apply, just use the percentages for those that I had on the other charts. It's confusing a bit, but if you I mean, I can't do this by memory. I gotta, when I'm doing it for my own stuff, I gotta go back and look at this model myself and say, okay. And it was the only way I could figure out if I was, you know, that my lamb was profitable because of that variation of cuts. So just real quickly, I'm just going to go, I just have like 2 or 3 slides just for poultry. It's really all the same thing here. But it's, all right, so I'm not going to talk about yield. I mean, the great thing about doing poultry is you get turnaround. It's the only livestock you get a turnaround in 8 weeks from birth to slaughter. And also you get an 80% yield back just of, it's the only livestock that's going to gives you the highest yield, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean we make the most money, because if you're, these 3 are our big money sinks, right? It's feed, processing, and labor. So I think what we have to talk about is, well, we can't really control the amount of feed they're going to eat, right? It's standard thing that a broiler, to give 5-pound broiler dressed, you've got 15 pounds of feed into it. It's a 3-to-1 ratio, right? 3 pounds of feed to 1 pound of dressed meat. But one thing we can do is maybe we can control some efficiencies around our feed. You know, are we feeding correctly so there's not a lot of waste involved, and that all the animals are getting enough feeder space that so you can get some consistent, make sure your weights are consistent. And so maybe it's knowing where the feeder height is. Generally, you want to have feeders around the breast height of the chicken so they can't get in it. Because the natural thing of a chicken is the wind to get in there and scratch. They'll also get their heads in there and they'll throw it around looking for the most tastiest morsel that they want. The more we can limit that, the better. Correct amounts. Are we running out of feed? If we run out of feed between feedings, that they're piling in there. Not only that, then you also get damage to the birds when they do that. And the right feeder space, which is generally like 3 inches per bird. Of feeder space. If you're doing the trough feeders or the round hanging feeders, you want to figure about 3 inches of space around those troughs. And that's going to, because when they get up to this size, that 5-week period, that's when you start to see, you got the roosters are bigger than the hens a little bit, and if there's not enough feeder space, what do? They step on the one in front of them to get them to move, so then you got claw marks on the back. So a lot of this, again, is about efficiencies. So processing, same thing. How many birds can we do in an hour? And I would say most of the efficiencies are probably with the setup and cleanup. Because if you've done this for a little while, you get to a rhythm and you can go through a pretty good number of birds in an hour. But most of the time is the setup and the cleanup. Because maybe we're not doing this every week. Maybe we're doing it once a month. And of course, you want to have the cleanest facility you possibly can, but can we do that? Because I know a couple who's fanatical about their clean, but consequently, they've got an 18-hour processing day. And then start thinking about there's their whole their sink in their profitability. That doesn't mean they can't. What are the ways we can have the same level of cleanliness, but with a shorter time period of getting that set up and cleaned up at the end? And this is also what I'm finding too is everybody tends to look at their processing equipment as a one-time purchase. Well, we had the money at the time, we invested, we're not counting that in our costs. Well, yeah, this stuff lasts a long time, and it may be, chances are you've got good equipment and you're going to have it for the entire time of your farming career but you are going to need new fingers for the plucker eventually. Everybody who's got a scalder, especially a gas scalder, at some points needs a new thermostat. They need a new igniter. They all go bad. So you got to figure this stuff in. Everything's got a depreciation value. And all that, you figure all that stuff in is just going to add to the profitability you have in your farm and your cash flow. And labor, again, is efficiency, paid, unpaid labor. If we all count ourselves as unpaid labor, right? So, but there's a value to that. We may not be making, but what would we like to make? So maybe we eventually get to that point. And this is a tool that I found that I really liked. This is from Washington State University. There's the website there, so that's should be on your handout. I'm almost positive I put that in there. Oh, it's not. So, what's that? Okay, so I apologize. This might got added in later.
Brian, do you want me to hand out the handouts that you brought? Because it has.
It does have it in there?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Because it's really easy budget tool, which is what I like, right? Easier the better. I'm fairly lazy. So it allows you to enter in if you've got 3 farm scenarios that they took actual numbers from, these 3 farms, and then you can add in your numbers, the answers to the question here for the numbers. How many birds do you anticipate to raise? What's your price per pound you're selling them at? What do you think the average weights are going to be? How many batches per year? And then it gets into the cost of production. And then it's got a separate button that you press on that when it gets to processing, and then you can add in your processing. They ask you processing questions about your equipment you use. Are you renting? Do you own? What's your labor costs and all that? And then it throws those numbers back in here, so when you get to the end, it says you made or lost so much per pound, per bird. Because the scenarios I ran for at least Pennsylvania was, I'm going to say my processing costs, they were, in the scenario that I ran, figuring that I'm not most efficient, I got $4 per bird in processing. I was raising 600 birds, average 4.5 pound birds. I sold them at 4.25 pounds, and even figuring in my unpaid labor value, along with maybe some paid labor, I was netting $1.16 a bird. So you can see the margins are going to be really pretty narrow. And Paul always knew they were narrow, but when we got these jump in our input costs, and I still had people in my area who were saying, "Oh, we're selling $3 a bird. We're going to raise double what we raise next year." Okay. I said, just more aggravation, or are you actually going to make more money? Let's sit down and look at this. So, it doesn't take that long to do, so I encourage you to go there and play with it. And the nice thing about having these farm scenarios here is if you didn't know a number, you could at least make an educated guess, maybe giving by what they put in. Okay. So thank you. I know the material is a bit confusing, but I hope it's a help to you.